Welcome to our first ever Bellevue Growcast.
Oh man, this is exciting. This is like kid at Christmas, man.
Yeah, we got Christmas lights almost too. But yeah, this is a new thing that we're doing here at Bellevue, and it's going to be a podcast, as you heard in the intro, that's designed to help you to grow in Christ and to become more Christ-like. And primarily, the way that's going to work for this year is through our Bible reading plan. Tell us about our Bible reading plan this year.
Well, so last year, I think it was pretty good success doing the New Testament reading. Now, it was 5 days a week, right? One chapter a day, and we, got all of our lessons, and Tim, centered his sermon around a New Testament, verses. Thought it was pretty good. I thought it was well received. So we decided, among us that we would just go straight into Old Testament. So we found a fairly decent reading plan, we thought, that broke it up into kind of areas of the Bible, the wisdom literature, the law, and gave us some small bits every day. Now, flip side of that is there's a lot more books in the Old Testament for some reason than there is in the New Testament. So we'll have a lot more reading, but that's good, right?
That's good, yeah. I mean, like with the New Testament reading plan, like I learned a ton of stuff, and I've read the New Testament much more than I've read the Old Testament, and that's probably true of most Christians, I would assume. We're just more familiar with the New Testament generally. I mean, there's a few Old Testament buffs out there. But I'm really looking forward to this plan because I think I'm even going to learn even more reading through the Old Testament.
Yeah, and I think the plan, right, forces you to read everything. The genealogies, the history stuff, the stuff that we don't really understand, right? And even like you said in the New Testament, I found myself, and I heard from several other people that discovering things that they never saw before, just from that structured reading every day. And I just feel certain that's going to expound on, just exponentially grow in the Old Testament, because there's just things that we don't ever touch, what I mean?
Yeah.
Because most of the time our lessons, and not to criticize, the Lifeway lessons or anything, but they typically seem to want to lean toward New Testament writings just because they're easier to interpret, they're more applicable probably, or easy to make an application, I think, in our lives. But
yeah, it's easier to draw out application from a New Testament passage like Romans, 7 or Romans 8 or Romans 6 or any of those wonderful theological passages. But like in the New Testament where it's heavy on narrative, and sometimes the narrative is really long and you're reading in it, for 30 minutes, and you just kind of get lost where, what's the point? How does this apply to my life today? Right. And so that's what we're going to be hopefully trying to shed some light on with this podcast. Is we're gonna dive into those strange stories, because there's strange stories in the Old Testament, and we're gonna try to dive into those and shine some light on those, and then also try to help us realize what is the application from my life from this Old Testament text. And so we're not gonna shy away from the hard passages. And one thing I really want us to really try to do through the Old Testament is see reoccurring themes that unite, and link to the New Testament. And that's really the next question that we're answering with this show is, why are we focusing on the Old Testament? And the main reason for me is that it's two testaments, but it's one story. It's one story of redemption told through two different testaments. There's over 40 different authors of the Bible that spans over 1,500 years, but it's all focusing towards one story and that is redemption through Jesus Christ.
And I mean, Jesus obviously loved the Old Testament, right? Now, it wasn't called the Old Testament then. It was just the writings, the prophets. In fact, our Bible study this morning, I'm dating this podcast, but the one we had this morning, he chastised the two guys, the two apostles on the road to Emmaus for not understanding the Scriptures. And he would have been talking about the prophets.
Yep.
He talked about, he says, why didn't you understand what Moses had written? Why didn't you understand what the prophets? So he relied heavily on the Old Testament, on those writings. And so I think there's just so much for us to get out of that. And it's a little hard work, but when he opens our eyes, I think when we're reading that and the Spirit is really working through us, you can see some amazing things, I think, in the Old Testament.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, to me, when you see like God's unfolding plan in an Old Testament passage, particularly the ones that point to Christ, like there's something like it just hits so hard in a way that's it's hard to describe, because you see the sovereignty of God, you see His unfolding plan that spans thousands of years, and it's hard to, like, I don't remember how many different prophecies that were in the Old Testament that have been fulfilled, but it's like thousands or something, I think.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable. Like there was some biblical scholar that like added up, like tried to calculate the odds of this just happening by chance, and it was like 1 in a billion something or whatever. And
I think I heard somebody say one time it was like finding a nickel in a parcel of land the size of Texas.
Yeah.
It was like you stumbled across a nickel, something the size of a nickel. So it's yeah.
And so we'll in this podcast that and I want to say that, like, the church is going to use this podcast for various things. The reoccurring thing will be Chuck and I and some different teachers. We're going to have different guests on. We'll have, of course, Pastor Tim on, but we'll use that to kind of walk with our Bible reading plan through the year. But we'll also have some other things in there too. So we might have some testimonies, and we might do some special announcements through this podcast. And it's going to be available as a video. It's going to be like on YouTube and Facebook. It'll be available wherever you listen to podcasts. You can just type in Bellevue Growcast and wherever you get a podcast, and it should come up. And you could subscribe to it, and it'll it'll come up, and you can listen to it on your way to work and all that kind of thing. But in our Bible reading plan segment, we're going to have 3 main sections. First, we're gonna talk about our highlights. We're gonna highlight a really powerful part in each passage that we do, or each that we pick from the reading of that week. So we'll be looking ahead each week. We'll be talking about the reading that is to come, and each episode will come out on Mondays, and so you'll be able to listen to it, and we'll talk about different highlights of powerful passages. It could be we could highlight a character, we could highlight a theological idea, we could highlight a particular story, and then we'll have shadows. And the reason why I chose highlights and shadows is because I like photography. Yeah, I know that's surprising.
Yeah.
But the shadows will be we will try to tackle those passages that there's something in there that we just gloss over, that we just don't know a lot about, that we maybe it's a hard passage that we don't. We read it and we just move along, and we're just like, okay, I don't understand that. We're moving along. Or it could be a shadow in the sense of it's a foreshadowing of Christ to come. And so we'll have highlights, shadows, and then we'll try to tackle a little bit of application, like how does this passage apply to my life?
And we'll have all the answers too, right?
Yeah, no, we won't.
Like that Abraham, with his Sarah saying it's my sister, and then
Rahab
we got to
lied.
work on that.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on there, but we'll work on it.
Yeah. So that'll be the general outline, and this is just kind of our introduction to the show, just kind of explaining what we're going to be doing and why we're doing it, because we at Bellevue, we want to be Bible focused. We believe that God himself, the creator of the universe, the creator of all that is, our Redeemer, our Defender, our strong tower, we believe that he has spoken to us through his scriptures. And so we want to be a church that is serious about studying all that he has said to us. I got that phrase from Hallie, actually. I saw where she had posted on social media, like, don't you want to read all that God has said to us? Yeah. And so I think it is important as a church that we walk through the scriptures together and we try to understand and learn how those scriptures can apply to our everyday lives.
And, I've thought too, I don't want to, go to the pearly gates, whatever, image that you want to say about, when it's time for our judgment. And be lacking in that, because I think God has given us everything, and I think even now we've got opportunities and resources that people before us had no access to.
Oh yeah.
So there's no excuses, I don't think, for us to say I don't understand, or I don't. There's just no excuses, I don't think, for us these days. So. I want us to just really study, and not just read for reading's sake, but to get something out of it. Look, if you only read one day's worth, but God speaks to you, deeply, then shoot, do one day, don't try to just cram everything in for the sake of cramming it in.
Yeah.
So I agree. I would love for our church to just, every week, somebody come up to us and say, dang, can you believe that story?
Yeah. Yeah.
What was going on there? Or even better, God spoke to me when I read this and opened my eyes to something I'd never thought about before.
Yeah. So thanks for listening to us, and look for the episodes. And we want to challenge you officially to read the Old Testament in 2023. Because when we read, if you want God to speak to you, all you have to do is open the Bible up.
That's right.
It's right here. He's given it to us. And what a blessing that is. And so thank you, and we will see you next week.